Mhm.
All right, we are live. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Tony Maritato. I'm here with my co-host Jimmy McKay, and of course, Dr. Pedro. I don't even want to try to pronounce your last name. I was listening to Nathan Shields say your name like 10 times. Please tell me how to pronounce your last name.
It's Teixeira.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, I know, it's a tricky one. Crazy Portuguese name.
What is your heritage? Where are you from originally?
So it's Portuguese, and my family specifically is from the Azores, which is like these
Wow.
teeny tiny islands in not the middle of the Atlantic, but kind of close. So if you ever kind of go scrolling around a big map and you see little dots, that's where I'm from.
Do you ever go back and visit?
We would go a lot when I was a kid, like most summers, because all of our family was back there. So to see grandma and grandpa and everybody, we would go. I haven't been back though in a very long time. Sadly, it's been hectic.
Wow. Yeah. Well, before we jumped on, Jimmy had noticed I spelled the name of the company wrong. It is Prediction Health. And so I said, okay, no problem. We'll whitewash this. That was intentional so we can gain attention so people can tell me that I had a typo. There we go. But that being said, I mean, you've got some amazing content out there on social media. I have talked to you for over an hour. I had such a great time when we did that. I don't want to go too deep into your background. You are an MD, you do have a PhD, but I really want to jump into the most exciting stuff that you are doing with Prediction Health. So give us like the 30-second. You're a co-founder, CEO. Where are you in the company right now?
No. So yeah, I'm co-founder and CEO. We started full time on this back in 2017, and just really excited to take AI and put into healthcare and do useful things for folks. And for physical therapy, that started off with us making these AI models that go through and read every single note and help do compliance, so you don't have to do peer reviews, which people really like, and then CPT coding assistance as well, because that's another thing. It's like there's so many different activities, so many ways to do it. And so having the models be able to give people feedback on that, and again, read all the notes to find, opportunities to improve is really helpful. And then now the next ask we got was, can you help with these documentation things we got to do? We got to spend all these hours. I don't want to do this at, midnight or 3 a.m., which we do see at times. And so now we have AI models that are helping therapists write their note, both with and without audio, which, both are different workflows that are really important to people. So now we have stuff for that. So that's like the 30-second. And I'm very like R&D and product focused. I like building stuff. I love getting to work with our team. We got a lot of really great people who are very talented coders and data scientists. And that's what makes me really happy at the end of the day, is building useful stuff and doing the tech piece, but making sure that it goes to something that actually delivers value to people.
So take me back to that original, you and the co-founder. How did you guys sit there and say, you know what? Why are we spending our time in medicine? We need to make the transition into tech and solve different problems. Like, how did that come about?
So my co-founder is Ravi Atreya. He's the same program, so MD, PhD as well. And he's super nice, very, very calm, relaxed guy, which is helpful in startup land. And we've been talking about this since maybe the first or second year of med school. So you're talking like 2010. And we met in 2009. And we just kind of bounced a lot of ideas back and forth, because we were at Vanderbilt, and they had their own EMR. So you had access to millions of patients and the data there when we did our PhDs. And it was so cool. And we had all these models that we were doing, but to actually make it that it's something that the clinicians were going to use when they were seeing patients was this Herculean effort. Like our entire PhDs was like one question, one tiny little question that we had to set up and did data cleaning and all this stuff. And we got to the end of our training, and it was, well, this is nuts. Like, this should be so much better. And so we can go just residency and focus on seeing patients, which we like to do, but we have to use the tools that exist, or we can go try to make the tools that we wish did exist. And we're kind of, foolish. So we were like, let's try. We'll probably fail, but we'll feel too bad if we don't at least, give it a shot. And so we did, and we didn't fail yet. And we've managed to build a lot of useful things for people, which is really rewarding. So, here we are trying to make things better by making people's lives easier and bringing AI and making it easy to bring these models into that real-time workflow, and for leaders, in organizations, and make it not a Herculean effort for every new model that you want to launch.
I know Jimmy and I talk about this all the time. Like, it's so hard to change deeply established patterns, even for myself. I want to do something. And in the patient care arena, patient comes in, they need to start a new exercise program. How do we get them to do that? How do we get them to do that? How do we get a therapist to start using tools that are to their advantage, going to make their life better? But it's something different. I mean, I do things in my system that are so old and outdated just because that's the way it's always been done. And I love technology. There are therapists who don't even want to embrace technology. I would love to hear about how you guys help the therapist overcome some of that inertia of this is the way we've always done it. We don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So the way I like to think about a lot of it is that it's incentives, and there's that whole set of things that you think about when you want to form a good habit, and it could be anything in life. That usually sort of the same patterns apply. So the harder something is, it's like the bigger the wall is that you have to jump over. And so if you want people to do more of it, then like make it easier. So so then whenever we're doing a new technology, we think a lot about like, what's that experience going to be? So you're in the room with a therapist, with the patient, right? You're the therapist. And how do we make it as easy as possible? And I like to say like one button. So it should be like one button, like one click should like get the thing done. And to get that behavior changed, right? We put it in the one EMR that they have, right? So there's not like a second app. Like, can we just put it in that workflow? And can they hit like one thing and get something of value out of clicking on that one button? And so just making it super, super easy and just having it show up and making it so obvious, like how it works and how to get value out of it by like, so there's like assessment generation as an example for goals. So when you get there, you don't have to do anything. It's just read everything so far and it shows it and it helps you generate compliant, appropriate, assessments and goals, for example. And you just hit the button and it puts it in there and you're reviewing it, right? But like, that's it. That's all you have to do is just show up where you need to go anyway in the current EMR that you're using and hit that like one button and you get some value out of it. That's by far the biggest leverage thing, is not fancy, razzle dazzle, but just like, how can you make it so easy that they do like one thing and get value out of it?
Yeah.
Jimmy, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm imagining people are saying, I'm picturing this technology feels a lot like driverless cars, where I've asked friends with like 5-year-old, 6-year-old kids, and I say, do you think your kid's ever going to have a driver's license? Well, of course. And I'm saying, well, in 10 years, will we need driver's licenses? So many people don't have, it's very difficult to think forward and what we'll get, but also what we won't have to do. Similar to what Tony was just saying. Listen, I like being forward thinking, but a lot of times I just get stuck in my rut. So I think the parallel with driverless cars is it feels scary because, a computer could mess up. And I'm like, well, have you met humans, right? So without getting to the nitty gritty, because it'll be over my head, right? I'm sure the thing that you pay attention to is, how do we make sure this is accurate? How do we make sure this is compliant in coding? I'm imagining you bake that into the cake. So all I want people to know is like, hey, we thought about that. We knew what your biggest pain points or what your biggest, you can't do that because would be. But how does that go in there real high level for people like me who don't build things for a living?
So we try to keep the thing that the user is going to have to do as very, very simple, but usually that means the technology has to be pretty clever. And
right.
so much time and effort goes into that. So we have a lot of folks that are physical therapists or other subject matter experts on staff that we coordinate with. And then it's a lot of work and like data wrangling, data organization, reviewing and doing all these rounds of iteration. And we have these really big models and all these infrastructure around those models where we're able to take piles and piles of examples across different settings, different EMRs, and for each of those questions, compliance, CPT coding, documentation, that you're then doing these deep dives and seeing like all the ways that you can try to like break it, and then labeling data and organizing data for every single one of those cases, so that then the model can like learn from all those examples, right? And so then you end up providing millions of examples of data, right, to these models. And they're really interesting because they take words in, and then inside the models, it goes like words to numbers. So that then in the future, you can give them more words that you turn into numbers. But then it's basically doing like math and like statistics. And it tries to be like, okay, you're telling me about this example, or like we have this type of patient. Oh, I've seen a low back pain patient that's, an older person that's had mechanical back pain before. And then inside, it's doing all this matching based, again, on all these data sets that we've cleaned and labeled and things, so that it can generate a really great high quality result. And so I'll avoid a lot of the math, right?
Yeah. It just sounds like it's a pattern recognition. It's a pattern recognition platform program thinking sort of intelligence, right? Artificial intelligence that has seen these things before. which means if it's a little nervous now, it's learning. The idea is it will just continue to improve. And when it's given a curveball, something it's never seen, it sounds like it'll just compare and say to itself, what is something similar that we've done? And then I'm gonna extrapolate. This is what human brains do. We're just super good at pattern recognition. But now you've got this super deep expert on CPT codes or documentation working for you alongside you, so you can do the other thing while it's doing this thing. That's really cool.
Yeah. It's a blast. I love the tech. It's so cool because usually you think about these things like, oh, like numbers and math, but to be able to give it words, like here's what I wrote for my HPI, and then have it understand that and do useful things with that. I always thought it's kind of like magical.
So let's go through some of the specifics. I know when you and I first met and I was researching the company, I heard a lot about analytics. How does Prediction Health kind of go through and does it directly connect into the EMR itself? Does it ride on a browser on top of the EMR? How does it get access to the information? But what does it do from an analytics perspective and a planning perspective?
So for the different services, there's different connections. So for like the thing that helps people write their documentation, that's a Chrome extension that's able to just integrate in and be part of the EMR. Again, you don't want to have to go to like another window and bounce back and forth and copy paste. So that's, that. And so it's reading the screen. But then for the analytics and for the back end of a lot of that other work, you have to look at millions and millions of notes. Or if you, especially, you're a big organization and you're looking at compliance and you're looking at the last couple of years, you have to get all that data out. So we have some partnerships with different EMRs, right? Like Prompt and WebBT and Empower more recently. So we're connecting in, we're getting that data, we're pulling it into our system, and then we have this big old pipeline of cleaning and normalization and all this stuff because folks do things differently. And then also, it's really important when you give data to a model that it's clean and organized. That's one of the ways that you can get into a lot of trouble. With data is, if I train a model on how do I keep this like not? So if I train a model on pictures, right? And then you use a different camera, right? Well, it might still look to a human like it's a picture of a cat, but just because it's like a different like width or something for the picture, or the sensor is a little bit different, you can get these completely crazy outputs, right? Because we see things differently than the machine sees it because it's all coming in as numbers getting converted. So we have all this pipeline to organize and normalize the data so that then as it's going through those millions of notes, right, it's able to get it all nicely organized. So back end, you've got infrastructure, you've got data pulling, you have some partnerships and some integrations that have been really great with these different EMR systems. And then you even have the Chrome extension piece, because again, we wanted to be able to give people a nice, simple, unified experience within the EMR that they're already using to, again, make it really, really easy for them. So lots of points of stuff we've had to build, which is complicated on our side, to make it a really simple experience for all our different, users, practice, leadership.
Wow. I can't even imagine like the complexities of getting into that data, the privacy concerns, the issues, that's always the chief thing that I hear about is, well, what about HIPAA privacy and how can you assure that? Going back to Jimmy's comment, though, I think this is so important. I use GPT-4o. I use other AIs. I understand the challenges of I say something, I'm expecting a response, and it gives me something different. But then when I started using AI related to patient care, and I started to look at my own documentation, and I think this is something that therapists don't do enough of. When I go back and I look at what I wrote based on what I tried to remember, as a 49-year-old therapist who's seeing, even on a low volume day, 6, maybe 10 patients in that day, I have got multiple inaccuracies. I've got missing or omitted facts. I've got so many things that are in there that I never looked at because I assumed I created it. It must be correct. It is not at all. So just like using an AI, you have to double check it. You have to make sure it's accurate. Doing your own documentation, you would have to do that stuff. And the conversation that I've been having with so many therapists goes back to, this isn't about replacing me. This is about augmenting me. I wish it was more augmented intelligence than artificial intelligence, because it's giving me access to data, to histories, to other cases that I never necessarily would have thought of or considered. And then I am the one that makes the final decision as the therapist. So could you talk to a little bit about insecurities that other therapists you've talked to might have about using this kind of technology? Is it going to replace them? Is it going to improve them? What are you seeing in the real world?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, right? Is this going to, or are the AI is going to take our jobs, right? Are the robots going to take our jobs? And if I'm going in to see somebody, right, there's things that you want a robot to do, and there's things that you don't want a robot to do. And if I, for example, wanted to remind myself regularly to do a habit, right, and I just set it like an automated text reminder that's going to come in, and every day at like whatever 9 a.m. is going to remind me to go for a walk or do some push-ups or something. If it's just a robot doing that, like I'm going to be like, I can ignore that. But if it's a person, if it's a friend, right? If it's like an accountability buddy, which I've done this now repeatedly because sometimes I want to start a habit and I know what, what's going to work and what's not. If it's a human on the other side of that, we think about it so much differently, right? Especially if you're in pain or you're a patient, you have a problem, knowing that it's not a robot that doesn't know what pain is, right? But instead a human being that can have that empathy is so much more motivating. And so there's these things that humans can do, and these relationships and this motivation that we can provide for each other that's so critical, especially in something like therapy, where you have to do stuff and you have to do your home exercise plan and you have to do these exercises when you don't feel like doing it, right? And you have to be part of the treatment. You have to cooperate, for it to be really functional and effective. That's stuff where humans are really, really great. And I don't see how how a robot replaces that. But for things like remembering all these CPT codes and making sure my note is compliant and doing all this writing and like documentation, like summarization stuff, well, the robots are good at that. And also as a human, I don't maybe want to do that. And so I think there's a really great synergy of those things where people are really great at certain things and people expect certain things and value things from other people in a way that just they don't from a robot, that I think it's going to be incredibly difficult to get rid of that. And in the meantime, why don't we give the therapist what they would like, right? Make their lives easier, make the compliance and the CPT coding stuff a lot easier so they have more bandwidth to show that empathy and that attention to their patients. And I think that'll improve the patient care. And at the end of the day, we started the whole adventure because we wanted to make sure patients got excellent care. And it's really rewarding to have this path to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the new things that you guys are doing specifically around real-time information processing? Tell me about that.
So we sort of have these two paths. The first one is like the super easy one, at least for the user, which is go into your EMR, start documenting. And we call it Sidekick because it's, your sidekick as you're doing your documentation, and it's reading through and then generates results for you and then just shows it on the screen. So when you get to your assessment, when you get to the goals, like on initial eval, it's got a draft of compliant, appropriate goals, and you had to do nothing. And so folks have really loved that. Additionally, and CPT coding too, like you're typing your interventions and it'll give you feedback on like, treadmill warm up under Theract, you might want to put that somewhere else, right? So it'll give you like a gentle little nudge or reminder on that. The next tier up where you do have to click the one button is audio. So you can do you're walking in the room, you're going to have your initial eval, you hit start, and it listens to that sort of ambiently to a conversation and then summarizes it into your subjective, objective assessment plan goals. And then that now shows up integrated into that same EMR. So it's just sitting there ready for you to go. But now with the context of, well, what did you talk about? What was the patient worried about? What did you sort of like teach them? What did you say your assessment was? And I really love that one because it reminds people to educate the patient about what they're thinking for a diagnosis and for what the plan of care looks like. And that's work, right? You have to spend time to do that teaching. It overlaps a lot though with what you would type into your own assessment. And so since the models are smart enough, you can really focus in on the education that the patient gets so that they understand the treatment. So hopefully you get a lot more compliance and a better outcome for that person. And simultaneously, you're going to get your assessment drafted out too, right? So it's like taking work off your plate and freeing the human, in this case, right, the therapist, to focus in on doing really great education, to the therapist. That's one of my favorite examples of it.
And I imagine, I don't know, Tony, I imagine, we're going to be finding a lot of things that PTs are already doing, but not necessarily being given credit for, or that showing up in the documentation because we might discount it. Education being one of those things is a lot of times we'll do it and not really think about it. And then we don't mention it, or, hey, don't bill for it because, hey, I did some other things. Let me focus on some other code. So I like the name Sidekick because I think it's super marketable, but I also think it's a good way to think about this, which is you're the Robin to my Batman, not replacing, but you're yes and.
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the things that I've been using AI scribe technology for over a month now. And as I experiment and tinker with it and figure stuff out, I run into roadblocks. But at the same time, I see things. I realize I never would have documented certain elements that were communicated between the patient and I, but it was in my head. It actually occurred. I just would not have thought to put it into the medical record. And so it's finding and extracting that added value. And when therapists get frustrated that they don't get paid enough, I try to help them separate. Look, you know what you're doing. The patient knows what you're doing, but the payer, the auditor, the reviewer has no idea except what they see on the screen. And so I agree. This gives us a great opportunity to capture those pieces of value that we would have otherwise let go unrecognized. So what are some of the other opportunities or new things that are happening today, 2020, 24, compared to even just a couple of years ago? Like, you guys have been at this for a long time. A lot has changed. How is this evolving? What's gotten better?
Yeah. So a lot of the technologies for especially the ambient processing, these generative AI technologies have gotten so much better. I'm sure a lot of your audience probably has tested things out with like ChatGPT and other tools. And of course, on like our iPhones or other sort of like mobile devices, a lot of that's gotten better, right? People are noticing that it can pick out like, oh, I took a picture of a sunset or a cheeseburger or something, and it's identifying that, and that's what the users see. But the tools for developers have gotten a lot better too. And that has just enabled so much more, because part of the reason is we started a ways back. We were actually originally a documentation focused company of just like human review of notes that were generated in combination, right, with human effort and with AI summarization. And it was really, really hard to get to that like level of accuracy that you need, because you don't want to have like a kind of good note, right? These are used to take care of people, and so you want to make sure the quality is quite high. And so compliance, the CPT coding were things that we could focus in on more narrow domains and get good performance out of those. But now with the generative technologies, with a lot of the things that have been learned over the last couple of years, it's now made it possible for us to be part of more of that conversation, that real time, and then provide a lot of value there. And the most exciting thing to me about that is that if you want to be able to positively impact what clinicians are doing real time, that's where you have to be. You have to be in that workflow. You have to be part of the time when they're making their decisions, when they're asking the questions and gathering information. I think it's the highest leverage point. And to get that positive impact for the patients, and also a good outcome for the therapists by saving them time and effort, you need these types of models that can understand such a fuzzy thing as like a human conversation, where maybe you and I are going back and forth and we're just referring to stuff like, oh yeah, does this hurt? Like, oh yeah, that does hurt. And you have to know that from 5 minutes ago you're coming in for knee pain to be able to interpret that sentence correctly. And so that's been a very enabling and exciting technology on top of a lot of other exploration we've done over the years.
Help me understand, what does the real world rollout look like? So a new practice owner reaches out, they're like, hey, I love this. I love what you guys are doing. I want to improve, my patient care experience. How does something like this even just get off the ground? Is it something they do on their own? Do you guys have an onboarding process? What's the next step?
Yeah. So sometimes folks have questions. So we have a demo that we'll run through with them, right, and explain things. They can ask questions. They can see stuff. They can see us do like a little test case to kind of get a feel for it. But so then folks just reach out, right? We have our demo form up on our website, and we're happy to do those. So there's an educational component that can be helpful. But if people are really interested in their game to go, we set them up. And the analytics product and the real time are just slightly different, because the real time we can provide pretty quickly. So you can come to us, be like, yeah, I'm game. I want to use this. Come to us, and we set you up so that you can start. You download a Chrome extension, and on WebPT, Clinician, Prompt, Empower, you can just log in, start using it, right? And that's great. Now, the analytics tool, we have to pull in the previous year, 2 years, et cetera, of data. So then you give us authentication credentials, and our pipeline, we connect it. It's HIPAA compliant and secure. We pull that in, we do all of our analysis. And then for that, we have our customer success folks, which we have a lot of really great folks. Kelly is one of them, and people love Kelly. And they'll actually then set up a meeting as a kickoff meeting to walk you through that. Because for a lot of these practice owners, they've never had access to compliance or CPT predictions from AI and dashboards for every single visit, that their folks are doing. And so we have a kind of a nice white glove onboarding experience for them, where within 1 week, 2 weeks, we get the data pulled in, we schedule a kickoff, and we can then walk them through and say like, hey, here's the top 3 things that I would focus on if I were you in your organization to make sure that you get the most bang for your buck, the most ROI on a compliance and CPT and all the other sort of analytics that we do for their retrospective data.
Yeah, I feel like the first couple of things we were talking about was really tactical in terms of like patient care. How is this working, right? What is it going to do? Is it safe? Is it accurate? But there's 3 bullet points on your website, which I think speaks to decision makers. Clinicians would be like, hey, help, a sidekick, great, like I'm all for it. But we know who the decision makers are, right? These are business people. So there's 3 things you have on your website that caught my eye, which I think are going to make the people who would say we're going to adopt this or not, which would be optimize CPT coding for 5 to 20 times ROI, remove up to 75% of the therapist's documentation burden. There's a double-edged sword there. We'll get to that in a second because I know clinicians are already thinking about it. And reduce risk of audit failure. That first and second one, optimize CPT coding for 5 to 20x ROI and reduce risk of audit failure. The business owners out there are like, yes, please, you have my attention. I think the middle bullet, which is remove up to 75% of therapist documentation time, therapists are like, great, but then they're like, wait a minute, I bet you my boss is just going to give me a little more, just going to hit me with a few more patients because now that I'm more efficient. But those 3 things are making people who run clinics, organizations who are constantly doing juice versus squeeze metrics. So those have to be in your thought process. And I like how we're talking about them next, not first, which is this good? Does this help therapists, reduce their burden, be more accurate, all those things? But it has to be a good business decision as well.
Yeah, you kind of need like a combo approach. I'm really glad you called out the CPT thing too, because that's one of the best examples that therapists are doing functional activities, advanced things, and the codes they may choose or the way they do the units can leave a lot of opportunity, there. And what we see is like a 3-to-1 ratio of like, sometimes people are going too high, right? Like it doesn't justify it and you shouldn't. And we try to tell you that so you can pull it back. But way more of the time, folks are doing work that they're not getting necessarily reimbursed for. And, that's not good either, right? If you're doing a lot of work and you're doing so much training to get to that point, you should be reimbursed for the quality of care that you're giving. And so the ability of the models to go through and like highlight those and then show the examples so that people understand like, oh, wow, that is a functional activity. That's better. And then you see better care. So we see folks will stay longer and you'll get a longer plan of care if there are more functional activities over the course of that plan of care. Like as if they, maybe get a little bit more bored or they don't see maybe as much progress if it's just kind of like, Therax. Just, as an example. And we have a presentation with some cool graphs on that if folks want to look on our, webinars page.
I was always taught, I remember as a PT student looking around and saying, well, how I, learn to bill or code, that was a direct representative of the clinical instructor I got. So it really was sort of the roll of the dice where like, how do you do things? You're sort of a photocopy of a photocopy eventually, but this is a good way of being able to self-audit. Like we haven't even touched on the fact that you can now compare yourself against yourself as a clinician, yourself against benchmarks as clinicians. This might be able to help you if you get stuck in a rut. Well, we notice you prescribing this activity, but this CPG, this clinical practice guideline from 2 years ago says that this might be something that you might consider. So it's like having a really, really great, sidekick working with you.
Yeah, I can't believe, we can never see our own blind spots. And this is something that I've always recognized about myself. I remember the first time I turned a camera on and recorded myself doing an initial evaluation. That was one of the things I loved about having student PTs, because I had to self-analyze what I'm doing.
Yeah.
There was a great post on one of my Facebook groups the other night where somebody had said they didn't like a particular EMR because they had to put all of the interventions they were going to do in a plan of care on day number 1. And I thought, have you not always put all of the interventions in the plan of care? Like, I know what I'm going to do. Why it's a plan. Anyway, this person had never done it before. This person had never heard of this before. And I think of therapists that I talk to that can't see their own blind spots. And so Jimmy said it, you're a copy of a copy. At most, you got exposure to a handful of therapists. Hopefully you got a good one in there. something like this gives me another set of eyes, another set of ears, helps me catch details I would have missed, helps me, anonymize data, but helps me compare across so much information that I never would have known.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure we've all had this conversation. Well, if the patient's having trouble feeding and they're flexing their elbow and bringing hand to mouth, it could be therapeutic activity or it could be therapeutic exercise, right? There's a huge difference in the reimbursement there. But if we don't have an understanding of what's the intent of therapeutic activity, what's the intent of therapeutic exercise, clinicians are just out there doing what they do best, but they're not understanding the monetization behind the scenes. So, these are the kinds of problems that it sounds like you guys are solving. That being said, I am genuinely curious. What are some success stories? What are some special cases that you've had over the years that kind of stand out to you, not mentioning any names? Be like, yeah, this person was dealing with this, and then, we helped them with that, and now all of a sudden this was the outcome.
So we've got a lot of really great examples across the board. One of our earliest alpha testers, when we started doing the documentation thing, for example, he's overall, doing a good job, but still doing notes on evenings and on weekends. And it was something in the range of, I think, of like 9% of the time, he's doing this documentation, way later. And having just the text only tool, but then we added the audio tool for him as well, is able to basically get 98, 99% of his notes done within 24 hours, not on weekends, not on evenings. And that was a huge qualitative, jump. That's what he kept highlighting. He's like, I get home and I don't have the things. I'm not catching up on documentation. I'm leaving and I have it done. And just the happiness, in his voice, sharing that and sort of reducing that burden, because, burnout largely driven by documentation, all these like admin tasks that you have to do. It doesn't feel rewarding and satisfying to have to do all this typing for work that you've already done, for patients you already helped, right?
Right.
So that was a really, really rewarding one. And then on like the compliance side, we've seen people shift their CPT coding really effectively. We've seen some really 50% Therax, maybe even more, that folks been able to get a much better distribution of their Therax and Theract and their neuromuscular education codes as well, which is great. And it's, I think, a credit to the entire industry is that therapists, they're competitive at times, which is really great to see, but they really want to improve. And when you give them a number that they can optimize and improve, and we've seen this with countless practice owners where it's like, oh, I want to see my scores, I want my notes to be better, and that tracking that result and seeing that they improve, seeing that they sort of then better distribute their codes they really like, and seeing compliance improvements as well across even really large sites. So we have some larger sites where they've done these education efforts and have everyone gets like a a snapshot, kind of like a scorecard type thing, so they can see how they're doing.
Sure.
And the entire organization, like a 15% improvement in their compliance score, from like a 60 something up into the 70s, and like an 80 is already plenty enough. That's the thing we have to remind people, again, because of the competitiveness. Folks want to go for that 100, but like once you're above 80, like you're in a really good spot, like 80 to 90 range, because you're largely justifying your care. You're doing a really, really good job. You don't have to go, and spend all that extra effort to get to the perfect 100. But we do see some people where they're just like, I want to get a perfect score. It's like, well, you're in the green zone. You're totally good. Like, right. You don't have to go nuts about it, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, those are a couple of the examples that really stick out.
You want to do better. You want to do faster, but you want to know that you're being safe too, right? I mean, how many times? I have no data on this. I'm sure Pedro can pull this out now or sometime in the future, but how many times a therapist, if it was a jump ball on how I should bill, they would opt for the safer, lower amount because I just would rather be safe. I'd rather be accurate, but this lets you take that subjectivity and put objectivity to it. I'm now putting other pain points to clinic owners. I'm still on the business owner aspect. Tony, you probably have a statistic, or this as a business owner, in terms of talent acquisition and talent retention. If you have somebody who in the beginning 3 months is underperforming, I'm going to have to put a lot of effort to get that person up to speed to keep them, because finding them is a cost, retaining them is a cost. It sounds as if this is going to clearly help that clinic owner identify where that person is falling short, or where that person is just not hitting the marks. It's going to save costs because you might not have to replace that person. It might have been one little tweak, but as a business owner, you can't sit over their shoulder. You can't be their sidekick in their first 3 months in that onboarding procedure, but a product like this can.
What's the thing? You just read my mind, Jimmy. the next thing that I wanted to ask you about, Pedro, was how this kind of technology is affecting recruitment, hiring, talent acquisition. Because I know that's one of the things, and this is going way back 20 plus years when we started our physical therapy practice. I remember a great physical therapist assistant, one of the best, said the main reason why he loves working for us so much, even though he got paid more working PRN at other facilities, was because we allowed him to control the music. He could play whatever music he wanted in the clinic any time of day. Fast forward now, you know, I know therapists that are choosing to work for organizations because of their documentation system and choosing not to work for organizations because of other documentation systems. I put a poll out. 93% of the people who answered my poll said, yes, AI, scribe technology, all of this stuff is going to be a major component in new talent acquisition moving into the future. Have you guys, Jimmy, you look like you're about to burst. Either of you guys, have you heard anything, said anything about this?
Pedro, let me just interject before you go, and I hope you have, because it's like, do you want to work for a place? We got chopped wood. Do you want to use an axe or a chainsaw? Yeah. Right. So of course you want to use the chainsaw, and that's sort of how I feel. So Pedro, what have you seen? This is a value add, right?
Yeah, no, this is a huge, issue for folks, and it's just been sort of magnifying over the last, 3-4 years, for a lot of reasons. And the cost, we were doing some estimates. If you lose a therapist, it's on the order of like over $50,000. Once you look at like how much patients that aren't being seen that otherwise would have been seen, your time to rehire them. If you're recruiting, there's costs on that, time that you have to spend interviewing. So it's very rapidly getting into a huge sounding number, right?
Yeah,
we roughly did the number, and it's like, if you just save one therapist, it pays for an entire year for 36 therapists for like Sidekick, as an example, because the magnitude of the problem is just so high, right? And so then we've had organizations just bring it up, like, hey, do you guys have recruiting materials? Like, can you give us some stuff and some videos? We recorded one for one of our sites where we have a current user who just said like how it's helping him, so that they can provide that as part of their recruiting materials. Like, hey, we have PredictionHealth, and you get to use Sidekick at our site, and like, we admittedly, like, they thought about it first, right? And then they told us like, oh man, that's awesome. That's a huge lever that we can provide. So then, like, we'll happily, provide videos and materials so folks can see that this is an option, at your site. And, I know I would consider, how are we going to document? What's the EMR? What's my, day-to-day going to be like? And the tool that you use, it influences it. I mean, again, that's why I ended up building stuff, was because I was just so frustrated with like, these are the tools that I have to work with. Like, we can do better, and I did this for now almost 8 years because that was so important to me. So I'm not surprised other people are going to use it in their job selection, hiring, recruiting decisions.
But in Tony's example, that PTA stuck around because they understood the value of having some place that my minute to minute is better. So maybe I'm short a couple $100 at the end of the year, right? Maybe, but the juice is worth the squeeze. So what is my day? What does it feel like when I walk out across the parking lot at 5 o'clock, right? Do I feel like I made an impact? Do I feel burned out? It feels like this type of technology is going to help. Maybe we don't say all those things, but most of the things that I've said before, Empower EMR is a sponsor of my podcast. I said, don't you want to like the tool that you interact with likely more than a goniometer? You're touching your EMR more than you're touching a goniometer, more than you're touching, a tape measure, more than you're touching a lot of things. You should like that thing. It should empower you. It shouldn't be heavy. It should be easy to use and intuitive. And it sounds like that's the direction that these types of technologies are going.
No. Kelly has a really good quote, because she's a therapist, and she says when she got a chance to use a tool like this, that instead of having a new patient come in and thinking, oh, another initial eval I have to write, she said, hey, this is now an opportunity for me to use my clinical skills and solve some problems to figure out how to take care of this patient. And that switch in mindset, it was so much easier. Like, that was so rewarding to hear about. And
I mean, just before this call, I don't know if you can tell, I'm a little sweaty. I got paint all over me. Doing some renovations on the house, but the minute you're like, I need this tool, and you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and you get one, but now you sort of look around and you're like, where else can I use the new toy, right? So it's this eagerness to say, I understand what this does in this one situation. Okay, but wait, hang on a second. I can use it these 10 different places, and then you get better at using the tool. But here's the thing. The tool that I use to renovate my house doesn't get smarter the more I use it. It feels like this technology does. And that's sidekicky to me which is like, oh, have you thought about, and that's a relationship.
Now let's go down that rabbit hole just a little bit, because something else that I've mentioned publicly is before these kinds of technologies came around, we did things the way we did things, but now all of a sudden we have new doors that are open. One of the things that I've always personally been a fan of, I love patient care. I love evaluating patients, but I feel like the greatest value that I could deliver today, 22 years into my career, is to help patients who don't need physical therapy. They don't need a 12-visit plan of care. They just need a little reassurance. They need somebody with a professional eye and lots of experience to say, you know what, this is normal. This is normal. I see no red flags. You're going to do amazing. Check back in with me if you need me. And historically, the therapist who would spend 40, 50 minutes doing an evaluation, another 30 minutes writing up a report, doing all of this stuff, couldn't easily access those single visit plans of care because it was too cumbersome to get it done. But now that I have an assistant who is listening, who's documenting, who understands the minimum requirement for payment threshold of the evaluation, now I could do a really simple 20-minute eval just to say, hey, peace of mind, you're going to do great. Do these 2 exercises, check up with me in a month if you need me, but I don't even think you're going to need to. Now that opens a new stream of revenue. This is a new referral source. That person now is a raving fan because I didn't tie them into a 24-visit plan of care. And when they have their next problem, they're going to come back to me, or they're going to send family and friends. Like, there are so many little things, little doors that I see opening up with these kinds of technologies that aren't even on the therapist's radar. And that's where you go back. You look at ChatGPT when it was first introduced, everybody freaked out. We're going to take away all your jobs. But then writers figured out how to use it to make them more productive. It opened new opportunities. I live in ChatGPT 4.0. Every single day I'm using it. My wife's using it. My kids are using it. Like, we don't even know the way your technology is going to help us 5 years down the road. We cannot see what it's going to do, but I guarantee it's going to open so many doors. I know we're getting close to the end. Jimmy, any kind of thoughts or final questions you want to ask before we head home?
We're recording this on June 13th, 2024. And my hope is it won't even been 5 years, but in a couple years, just hindsight is so perfect that we're going to say, wow, duh, they were really questioning that. They didn't see that thing that's so obvious now 3 years from now. So Pedro, what are the things that you're seeing that are the I call them eyebrow moments, when you explain to someone like me who gets that this is a tool, but we're not elbow deep like you, it's this eyebrow moment, like, oh yeah, I consider myself a little bit on the right side of the bell curve because, like Tony, I'm using AI a lot, but I'm not as deep. I'm not trying to say I'm as deep as people who are, building things with it. But what's the thing one thing, right? A prediction of, like, we haven't even really talked about it yet, that's going to be commonplace in something like 3 years?
I think that on that time scale, that you're going to have this way that right now, if you want to pick the best thing for your patient, and imagine you had all the time in the world,
right?
You would go and you'd read all these papers and you'd ask a bunch of people, you'd ask all your fellow, expert clinicians, right? And you would do this and you'd, figure out what you could do for that patient that maybe is the absolute best. And right now, though, you don't have infinite time. You don't have time to go read all the papers. Right. No one can read all the papers, and you don't have time to ask all these clinical folks what would happen. And so we do the best we can. And I think that looking back from 3 years, that the AIs are going to be able to process all the patients you've seen, everyone's seen at your site, all the people, millions and millions of visits, look at the research literature, and then in this little, hopefully very easy one-click button type thing, little pop-up like, hey, did you consider these types of activities for this person? Or, hey, you haven't progressed care. Like the care is going to not be decided by the AIs, but it's going to be informed by information that it pulls in from all these places. And I think people are going to look back and go, I can't believe that we saw patients without this great, informational resource that runs automatically for me, for every single person I see.
Yeah. Right now it's often cited, and I don't even know if it's changed since I've been in PT school a couple of years ago, but it's 17-year gap between publish and practice, right? We keep saying this. I'm on the board of trustees for the Foundation for PT Research. We keep making research, but how do we make it digestible and usable? Have someone else digest it and then suggest it, right? Something else is going to digest it and then suggest it when appropriate. I think that you need the information, what you need, when you need it, where you need it. not knocking a journal club, but to have it in front of me on a dashboard, potentially at a suggestion button is okay, good. That's something I hopefully a kid in PT school now or a kid in high school right now who's going to be a PT in 5 years is going to say, yeah, how'd y'all get along with that? And hopefully they also say, what the hell's a fax machine? That's my other hope. That's my hope for the future.
The 3 years, I don't know if that's enough time.
Tony, what do you got?
All right. So Pedro, we are going to have you back. I'm going to put these statements out there because we're going to talk about it next time, but I would love to see how this is going to kind of connect with and work with wearable technology, right? My wife's got her Garmin or her whatever devices. Yeah, look at you guys. We've got that element. We've got the element of, really starting to understand the psychology of the patient. Like, I pride myself on my ability to connect on a human-to-human level with my patient, but I would bet there are things that are said during the therapy session that should be analyzed, and I should be better at connecting emotionally, psychologically, all of these factors. I think we're going to see AI technology that can analyze the conversation, not just produce documentation, but actually tell us what we could potentially do to better connect with the patient's insecurities, the patient's fears and anxieties, all of these other things. I mean, we pride ourselves on treating the human, not the condition. And this will help us move down that direction. So let's save those topics for the next conversation. What is the best way for people today, for decision makers? Go ahead, Jimmy.
I was going to say, let's make sure we get a connection. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the best way for decision makers to connect with you, to learn more about it and set up a demo?
So PredictionHealth.com, just all one word, just hop on over and come, chat with us. We love to do demos and answer questions for people. Got a lot of great folks that would love to walk you through and answer questions for you. And then if anybody really wants to nerd out on AI, you can always send a message to me at Pedro@PredictionHealth.com.
All right. Last thing I'll say, you take this or not, use this, put it into your program or not. Small talk button. A lot of PTs will say, I have a problem. What am I going to talk about today? Usually Monday through Wednesday, it was how was your weekend? Thursday through Friday, it's what are you doing this coming weekend? But any help on small talk, I'm sure PTs would appreciate, because we got a lot of time with our patients. We need things to talk about.
All right, I like that. That's a very creative idea. I will do some prototyping and we'll look into it.
Sounds good.
All right, Jimmy, Pedro, stay on here. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks.